Okay, so we are going to be comparing and contrasting Alice from Down the Rabbit Hole with Lucy from the first two chapters of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If you have not read the first two chapters of The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, or if you have not read Down the Rabbit Hole, stop watching and go back and read those. We're going to refer to these texts, but the assumption is you've either read this in class or on your own. Normally, this is something we teach in the months of January and February, and so this has always been an essay assignment as far back as I can remember. However, I know for a lot of students, if not most, this will be in the month of August, and this will be your first writing assignment that you do when we go back to school. And that can be intimidating, and maybe you're supposed to write a paragraph, but I'm teaching this as an essay because I believe the best way to learn to write an essay is to actually write one. But we're going to do it in steps. So if at any point you get overwhelmed in the various steps we do leading up to writing the essay, you can go back to wherever you last understood what was going on and watch from there. So there's going to be multiple videos to get us ready for this particular thing. So if we're comparing and contrasting, what does that mean? Comparing means looking at how things are alike. Contrasting means looking at how things are different. We are expected to do both. We're told to compare and contrast Lucy and Alice. And the best way to do that is to have a graphic organizer. A graphic organizer is a way of keeping all the information you need in one place. And so what I have here is I have made a little page with Lucy and Alice. And when I do this in class, I like to use chart paper, and I always write all my stuff about Lucy in blue and all my stuff about Alice in pink. And it just helps me keep track of the characters. Another thing you could do is you could do a Venn diagram where you have the two circles that intersect, and you have stuff about Lucy in one circle, stuff about Alice in the other, and whatever they have in common, you have in the little circle that the little part that kind of meets together. I like Venn diagrams. I just don't like doing them because I can't draw a circle. Another thing you can do is what's called a character contrast, but you could do this if you weren't writing about characters. And that is where you just draw a line diagonally across the page. And I have stuff about Alice and I have stuff about Lucy. And when I look at that, anything that they have in common, I underline. And therefore, the stuff that the things that would be similarities would stick out because it's underlined. Some students like to highlight those things. And the stuff that's not underlined or not highlighted would be the things that they don't have in common. And right there, you have a way of keeping track of their similarities and their differences. The other thing in fifth grade that you need to know and you need to have is what I call TBE. That stands for text-based evidence. How do you know what you're saying is true? You have to have evidence from the text to back up your claims. And in my class, that's an all the time requirement. And so if you learn to do it now, it's not such a big deal later on. And so what that means is if you say something is true, then you're going to have to back it up. So instead of thinking about what you think about Alice or what you think about Lucy, write down what you know, and then you have the facts in front of you and draw your conclusions from those. I'm going to give you an example. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the main things that Lucy does in chapters 1 and 2 so that I have those in front of me. So the main thing in chapter 1 is Lucy enters the magical world of Narnia through a wardrobe. That's pretty much the main gist of chapter 1, the main thing. All right, chapter 2, Lucy meets Mr. Tumnus, becomes his friend. He tells her about the Queen of Narnia, who wants him to kidnap, she wants him to kidnap Lucy. Tumnus helps Lucy escape, and she forgives Tumnus. Okay, so those are really the only things that we've experienced with Lucy so far. She goes through the wardrobe into the land of Narnia. She meets Mr. Tumnus and becomes friends with him. And even though he was supposed to do something horrible, he helps her escape, and he asks her to forgive him. And she says, "Of course I will." Okay, those two things we know to be true. Now, let's see what those things tell us about Lucy. And what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to go back to the text when Lucy is actually going in through the wardrobe. I'm going to find that for my evidence. Okay, so I'm here on page 4 where Lucy's actually, she goes through the wardrobe into Narnia. And I like this. This is the main paragraph where that happens. It says, Lucy felt a little frightened, comma, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. If the text tells me what's going on with the character, that's probably something important. So I'm going to take that entire quote and I'm going to put it into my graphic organizer. So I'm putting my quotation marks because I'm going to quote this completely from the text. I have to make it exact. Lucy felt a little frightened, comma. Let me go back and make sure I get this. Felt a little frightened, comma, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. Okay, Lucy felt she felt frightened. Then we have the word but. But is contrasting a language. It could also say, however. She felt a little frightened. However, or she felt a little frightened, but. So the idea is that what comes next is most important. She felt inquisitive and excited. Okay, what's inquisitive mean? We should know if we use context clues, inquisitive means to be curious, to ask questions. So that's what we learn about Lucy there, is that Lucy is curious and she thinks about going back, but she chooses not to. She chooses to keep going through this unknown thing. So think about what those things would tell us about her. So Lucy is curious and adventurous. You say, where did you get adventurous from? I looked at her actions. The fact that she thinks about going back, says she's felt frightened, but she decides to go on, and she continues into the land of Narnia. That lets me know right there. It's like, wow, this is, I wouldn't do that. If I walked through and I realized I was in another world and I turned and looked back and I could see the wardrobe, I would run right back to the wardrobe. I'm not adventurous at all. But she is. She's a little frightened, but she's curious and she's excited. And so she continues on into the world of Narnia. That lets me know she's adventurous. Okay, let's look at what the main thing that happens in chapter 2. She meets Mr. Tumnus, becomes his friend. Okay, so she becomes Mr. Tumnus's friend. Maybe that tells us that she's friendly, but it could be a Mr. Tumnus thing. It might not be that Lucy's just the most friendly person in the world. It could just be that her and Mr. Tumnus get along. And she wants, she learns about the Queen of Narnia, and the Queen wants Mr. Tumnus to kidnap Lucy because she's a human, and Tumnus helps Lucy escape, and she forgives Mr. Tumnus. Okay, that's a big deal. Mr. Tumnus asks for Lucy to forgive him, and I don't know that anyone would necessarily do that in that situation. She's about to be okay, and she could just say, you know what, forget you, Mr. Tumnus. I can't believe I ever went to your house, and this is just crazy, and I don't want to see you ever again. And instead, when he asks for forgiveness, she says, of course I'll forgive you. So what does that tell us about Lucy? It tells us that she's a forgiving person. Not everyone in the world's forgiving, but that's something that we learn about Lucy. And when I'm writing these things, if you think of another word, so if I say Lucy is forgiving, what are some other words that might come into your mind? What kind of person is forgiving? Maybe someone who's kind. All right, I want to have a little more evidence, direct evidence from the text. So I'm going to go look in the text where Lucy forgives Mr. Tumnus. All right, that's chapter 2. Ah, look here. Where he asks for forgiveness. She says, why, of course I can, said Lucy, shaking him heartily by the hand. And look at that next sentence. And I do hope you won't get into dreadful trouble on my account. See, going back to the text, I knew she forgave him because that's part of the main idea of the story. But I forgot that she says, oh, I hope you don't get any trouble on my account. That shows really how nice and kind Lucy is. She's just not saying, oh, of course I forgive you. And she's like, and she feels for Mr. Thomas, and I hope you don't get into trouble because of me. So she really cares for Mr. Tumnus, and she really cares about what happens to him. So I really know. I'm like, oh, she really is. She's a forgiving person. But I had to go back to the text, and I'm like, okay, I got this. I'm on the right track. Okay, so I have some ideas about Lucy. She's curious. She's adventurous. She's forgiving and kind, caring for others. Oh, let's go ahead and put that in there. She's caring for others. Lucy shows she's caring for others when she forgives, when she not only forgives Mr. Tumnus, comma, but says she hopes he does not get into trouble because, or how about from helping her get back to the lamppost. Okay, so far all we've done is work with Lucy. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing with Alice. Now, this gets a little more complicated because Alice is not the easiest text. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is about 60-ish years old, which sounds old, but it's really not. Alice from Down the Rabbit Hole is over 100 and something years old. So the language and what's going on is a little more difficult. So we're just going to write down the facts that we know from the story and then go back and do the same thing and see if we can determine some things about Alice as well. Okay, so let's go. And I like to have Alice in pink. So Alice follows a talking rabbit down a long, almost endless rabbit hole. Oh, and why did she do that? She's bored with sitting by the bank with her older sister. See, Alice, who was bored, was sitting by the bank with her older sister, sitting on the, I think it's on the bank with her older sister. Follows a talking rabbit down a long, almost endless rabbit hole. Okay. And what does that show us about Alice? This is that she was bored, okay? But she decides to go after the rabbit. So we could say Alice is curious. You could also use the words that we had for Lucy, a synonym, inquisitive. As Alice falls down the rabbit hole, she talks a lot. That's one thing you notice is Alice is just talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. And one thing I always try to get my students to understand is it's not just the thoughts in her mind. She's talking out loud. She's just talking and talking about every little thing and her cat and all this stuff. And most people would be freaking out, right? Like we're falling down this hole and she's just, I wonder, what's happening. Oh, look there. And there's all, and she's just going for it. Okay. And she's just talking and talking and talking. No matter what happens, it's like, okay. And then what happens? Okay. Alice goes, boom, she thumps down. And then there are locks and I have to go back to the text. Go back to the text. Yeah, there's the potion that she has to drink, and she just drinks it. That's incorrect. A lot. There we go. Pink. We want pink for Alice. Alice drinks a potion because it says, drink me. And she eats. Oh, what does she eat? Very small cake. That says, eat me. And then think about the ending. She's doing all this because she's hoping to change sizes. She hopes to either get bigger or smaller or find some way into the places that she's locked out of. Alice is sad at the end of the chapter when nothing seems to happen to her. And then I love that quote at the very end where it says, Alice had got so much into the way of expecting nothing but out of the way things to happen that it seemed quite dull and stupid for life to go on in the common way. I love that quote. It's one of my favorites from the story. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy and paste that in there. I got to put it in quotes because this is a direct quote. And I'm going to go ahead and change my font so that they all match. Okay. Love that quote. Okay. So we ask ourselves, what does this show us about? We said here that Alice, I tell you what, let's go ahead and underline the things that we know about our character. We're saying that Lucy, we said she was curious and adventurous. Lucy's forgiving and kind. Now let's look at Alice. We say she's curious and inquisitive. Let's fix that. It says. Okay, so as Alice falls down the rabbit hole, she talks a lot, she drinks a lot. Okay, so what does this tell us about Alice? Alice is very immature. I know you're saying, well, how do you get that from just eating and drinking? But you remember when she drinks the potion, it says drink me. And at first she looks at it. She's like, okay, I'm going to make sure it's not poison. Well, it didn't say poison, so I'll drink it. And she just kind of talks about all sorts of things. And she's a little bit immature. Sometimes my students say she's very childish, which she is. She's a little girl. And so that's something that we could say about her. But look at the end. She's sad. She's sad. I think my text is going to the next page. I don't like that. Let's bring it up. Okay, she's sad because nothing seems to happen to her. Let's underline this. Got all our stuff about our characters underlined. Nothing seems to happen to her. What does that tell you? Alice wants something exciting to happen. Okay, what kind of person doesn't want life to just be normal? They want something exciting. How might we describe them? Some people say, oh, that means they're excited. Okay, what does that mean? You want excitement. You want to go where you experience excitement. You want to go on an adventure. And so we could say Alice is very adventurous. Okay, I want that pink again. We're going to underline that. Okay, now I've looked at Lucy. I've looked at Alice. Let's go through and see what do we see that's similar. It might not always be exactly the same, although I think in this case it's going to be close to that. Let's see what we have that's similar. Okay. Lucy is curious and adventurous. We've got that. I'm going to go ahead and bold that. Alice is curious. I'm going to bold that. I have here that Alice is very immature. Do we have that over here? I don't. Now, I'm going to tell you something. A lot of my students, once we do Lucy and then we do Alice and we say, oh, she's immature. A lot of my students in previous years, they'll raise their hand and say, oh, Mr. Blevins, but Lucy, is she immature when she goes with Mr. Tumnus, even though she doesn't know him and she just goes back to his house? Isn't that kind of childish? And I say, oh, that's interesting. I didn't come up with that, but every year my students do. And so sometimes they'll go back and they'll add that in. And I say, well, do you have evidence to support? And they'll say, yeah, because she goes to Mr. Thomas's house. Like, okay, they go and they add that in. So maybe you found that as well. Lucy is forgiving and kind. Do we have that over here? No. Alice is very adventurous, just like we have up here about Lucy. Okay, so I can say that as well. So I'm going to bold that. Okay, so now the things that I have in bold, that's going to be where I compare. The things that I have that are not in bold about Lucy and Alice, those are going to be what I use to contrast. And look, I have all these things, all these examples, all these pieces of text-based evidence, full quotes to put in to support my ideas. Okay, if there's anything you don't understand, before you go on to the next section, go back and watch. See if you can, maybe I went too fast for you. Go back and watch it again. See if you can do that. And then maybe you have something in there that I didn't find. Like my students every year, they say, oh, well, Lucy also kind of childish? They have evidence to back it up. They put it in there. So I'm going to go ahead and stop right now. So we have right now, let's look at our graphic organizer. We have everything we need to write our essay. And that'll be the next step. Okay. So if there's something you don't understand, go back and watch. If you're ready for the next step, let's move on.